one, and you're on.
Okay, well, we're on. Hello, welcome to this Core Cities event. Numbers are ticking up in the participants label at the bottom of the screen. My name's Tony Travers from the London School of Economics, and I've been asked and very happy to chair this event today, which is on COVID-19. What isn't these days? It used to be Brexit, but now it's called COVID-19, and about our cities and city regions leading the Great Recovery. So the event starts now, 11 o'clock, just after 11. We'll be here till 12:30. We'll finish on time. And if we can move on to the next slide, please. So here's the running order for today. I'm going to say a few words when I've finished this broad introduction. We're going to hear first from Cllr Judith Blake, who is the chair of Core Cities and a leading mover in the UK's cities movement, if I can call it that these days, cities and city regions working together, and indeed towns working together. Then we've got a keynote panel consisting of Dame Carolyn Fairbairn, who is the Director General of the Confederation of British Industry, Polly Billington from UK 100, James Palmer, who's the Mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and Professor Anand Menon, who's Director of UK in a Changing Europe, a think tank that looks at, well, Brexit in Europe. So we'll hear from each of them for 5 or so minutes. Then there'll be an opportunity for Q&A, questions and answers. With any of you who want to ask questions, put them in the chat function. Get going whenever you wish. We'll get as many questions in as we can and as much discussion as possible. And then we'll have some concluding comments and indeed perhaps look forward to the fiscal statement that is going to give next week. And then one on, please. These are the Core Cities 3 tests by which the Treasury statement can be held up and judged. So here we've got them: fundamental recalibration of support to deal with very high levels of medium-term unemployment, the extent to which the statement brings forward catalytic infrastructure and other projects at scale, and then to stimulate business investment through a locally delivered equity business investment fund. So those are key issues for the cities moving ahead. And then lastly, 1 or 2 bits of housekeeping. This event, the webinar, is being recorded and will be shared on the Core Cities website. There's a hashtag, which is #CityRecovery, and the tag @CoreCities to continue the debate online, should you wish. While the panelists are talking, it'd be good if you want to use the chat function to share opinions and comments from me to draw on. You'll be able to ask the question, as I said earlier, and I will attempt to be fair and get a range of questions on different issues. And you'll get unmuted at that point by the controlling, like being a TV producer these days running these events. And it'd be good if panelists could mute your microphones when not in use. And of course, remember to unmute them when you are. Okay, now a couple of more words from me before I ask Judith to get going. So first, just to say, clearly COVID-19 is an event and has been an event for the United Kingdom, and indeed for countries across the world, like no other. And it begs, I think, a series of important questions for cities. And I don't want to go through them all, taking what others are about to say, but clearly the way in which the furlough scheme is removed, and then by sector perhaps, support are given to industries, particularly those that cluster in city centres. There is the issue of unemployment and in fact, the expansion of further and higher education that's going to be required. Personally, I think getting transport and people confident in transport again is going to be very, very important to cities functioning, not just city centres, but travelling around within cities, hugely important issue. The future of retail, and indeed the broader future of city centres, theatres, the leisure industry and so on. These are crucial to the continued success of cities and towns, and indeed, as the Core Cities principles for the Chancellor say, investment short and medium term. I don't say any more than that, just a number of things that I think about extensively myself at the moment. One final thought is all levels of government are involved in this. We are indeed all in it together, and indeed the private sector and the not-for-profit sector. National government's very important. We've seen in the complicated issues affecting Leicester City Council at the moment. National government, local government have to get their ducks in a row if these things are to work. Of course, in the bigger cities, we have city councils, metropolitan districts, combined authorities, and national government all seeking to work together. Anyway, enough from me. I'd now like to ask our keynote speaker, Cllr Judith Blake, the leader of Leeds City Council, and indeed of Core Cities, to get us going this morning. Judith, over to you.
Thank you, Tony. It's very good to be on the call with you, missing our conference get-togethers, as you were saying earlier. It's my enormous pleasure as Chair of Core Cities to welcome everyone to the call for this very timely debate as things are unfolding as we speak, I understand. We've also got a great panel, and many of the issues that Tony raised in his introductory remarks will be picked up as we go through, but obviously it's a vast area. I do want to start by just drawing our attention to all those who have lost people through the pandemic, and just recognising what a human tragedy it has been, not only on the awful issue of life and death, but also the impact that it's having on so many lives in so many different ways. And as the leader of Leeds City Council, I'm extraordinarily proud on behalf of our sector in the way that local authorities up and down the country have been responding to the crisis with very little warning, and really at all levels displaying incredibly strong leadership and responding to the issues such as providing for the homeless and vulnerable, but also, children, all of the vexed issues around education that are continuing, and the very vital services, emptying our bins, for example, absolutely critical things that we have to put at the forefront when we're talking about key workers and those workers that we valued through the pandemic who've kept going in very difficult circumstances. And of course, transport networks, and that is a much broader issue, as Tony suggested. But now we have to focus on moving into the recovery period. And I think it's our message, loud and clear, is that we have to move away from the centrally planned command and control style recovery that I'm afraid has bedeviled some of the responses that we've had to the crisis, not only wasting time, but also valuable resource. And we've put forward a series of proposals to government, and that we have one really golden thread running through all of our messages to government, that recovery needs to be locally led by people who know their communities best. And I think that we need to keep repeating that ad infinitum. It just is such a strong message that still isn't being picked up. And of course, our priorities, levelling up is still, I hope, on the agenda, and we've written to the Prime Minister himself very recently. I have to say the response to all of our efforts to engage with government have not been met with the response that we would have hoped, and we do hope now we're moving forward into the next phase that our requests to be taken seriously and to recognise our key role through Core Cities is really should be central to their thinking. So obviously, we recognise the issue around funding, and as we know, as I'm speaking, the news is breaking about a further funding package, recognising cost, but also the loss of income to some degree, probably something that we're all going to be furiously looking at very carefully over the next day or so before the Chancellor's announcements next week. But, our regions around our core cities drive 26% of our economy and are home to over 20 million people. And the fact that so many of our major authorities are actually saying to government, you need to work with us or we are facing bankruptcy, I think is a message that really does need to get home. So You know, we hear the mantra, austerity is no longer with us, but I'm afraid we're living with the impact of austerity that has had a real detrimental impact on our ability to respond, but we have managed to do extraordinary things working with our partners. But we really do need to have those conversations, you know, to how we actually are prevented from the cliff edge scenario. And I understand that the 3-year planning ask that we've put in has been listened to, so we look forward to that with interest. The one thing that I want to get across, and I keep repeating this, is that this shouldn't be seen as a cost to society. This needs to be seen as an investment that will prevent further costs further down the line, when we know, you know, if we don't do it, the impact on the most vulnerable will lead to incredible increase in the work that we have to do, both across adult services and children's services. But we had the announcement about the infrastructure spend, which again, when we been doing the analysis, which is still ongoing, is disappointing in terms of its ambition. But you know, we are here as core cities with our regions to work together to explain again our enormous potential to help with coming back from this, our real potential for growth, and always emphasizing inclusive growth and the impact of everything on people in our communities. Too often we talk about schemes without actually recognizing why they're so important for our communities, as well as for those employed directly in them. So we've been doing some great work with the OECD. I hope many of you listening into the call will have looked at the work on our website. Please do go there and look at it, and a real focus on regional productivity that's been so central to our debates and discussions before COVID came. And I would ask all of us on the call really to cease, if you like, the, I believe, divisive comments and arguments around the cities versus towns. We really are all in this together, and we need to recognise the symbiotic relationship between our great cities and our great towns, and indeed all of our communities within our regions. And you know, if we get that recognition that we support each other and work together on that, as we have been starting to do, then I think that's the way to move forward. We've had some terribly stark news just in the last 24 hours about the impact on jobs, and so many people now starting to recognise that they are going to be without employment. And we have in real concern, obviously, at the moment around tourism, hospitality, all of those areas that are really hitting the headlines at the moment. But what we know through our place-based work is that we can't rely on one size fits all. And that's where we need further devolution, recognising the success that we've had around skills and employment, all of those stimulus packages that have been so good, but also keeping us on a pathway to an inclusive, low carbon economy. And you know, one of the things that we're working at Core Cities is the whole area of retrofitting housing, really intensive with employment, but also much needed in terms of our communities, but also really answering the carbon targets that we're all working towards. And again, emphasising this being an investment, not a cost, and just thinking of the, as well, you know, as the increase in poverty that we're seeing, the real increase in fuel poverty is something that we absolutely have to take seriously. So I'm hopeful that we can get our message through. We want to be innovative. We want to look at how we can transform regulations that we believe are holding us back, how we can actually look at the free ports idea, and then but look at how we transform that to things that we're doing in our own communities around enterprise zones. So don't let's look backwards. let's look forwards. And, we're really proud that we've co-designed the Resilient Recovery Task Force, launching again this week. And I know Polly will be picking up on this. But, these are tough times. We have to maintain the pressure that we're putting on. But I'm delighted that so many people have come together to help us with the arguments that we're making. And I look forward to that work, moving forward and delivering on behalf of us all. Thank you.
Okay, Judith, thank you very much. And I'm sure we'd like to, corporately thank you and other City Council leaders for the remarkable work that's been done in recent weeks and months. I mean, we need government more than ever at the moment, local government as well as city, regional and national government. So thank you. We also need business. Carolyn, you have been at the epicentre of British business life through some of the most turbulent times ever, probably, in peacetime. So good to hear your response, not only to what Judith said, but your general take on what cities and business can do together with the Treasury from here on.
Well, absolutely, Tony, and a real pleasure to be here with you this morning. I was last with you at a Core Cities event in calmer times, and we were talking about the enormous role that cities and city regions have to play. I think that has only been strengthened, actually, by what we see now. And I actually wanted to just echo your thanks just then to Tony, to our extraordinary local leadership that we have seen. And in the next few minutes, I just want to give a business perspective on where we are. But one of the things that businesses across the country are saying to me all the time is they have hugely valued the power of local government. The distribution of grants, the support on the ground. This I think has shown what local government can do, and we are huge supporters as a business community. But where we are, the word unprecedented is used all the time, but I am just so struck by how absolutely true that is. If we look back to the great recessions of the last 100 years. This one is just different in nature. So, the Great Depression of the 1930s was fundamentally a demand shock. It was a financial crash-driven demand shock. In the 1980s, with Margaret Thatcher, it was fundamentally a supply-side shock. It was productivity failures on a massive scale, and we had a whole reform program through that. What we are seeing now is demand and supply combined in a shock to the business community that we need to charter a route out of. And what I would say is that in terms of the business response to the hibernation period, the lockdown period, it has been pretty good. It's been pretty good in terms of national government and local government working together. The furlough scheme has been a real success. I was talking to a business down here in Hampshire who said a combination of a bounce back loan and a furlough scheme has saved my business. And we've heard that across the country, the local grants coming through, absolutely extraordinary. But what I want to really communicate, and I can't communicate this more strongly, the tough times are starting now. They are really starting now, and the warnings around unemployment are absolutely real. We are seeing them coming through now. As soon as the contribution from business to the furlough scheme kicks in August, I'm afraid we will see an acceleration. And so I want to really say the three things, the three priorities for business in this next period are really, I think, uppermost in people's mind. The first is we must not think that we are out of the rescue phase. Even the headline of this conference, talking about the Great Recovery, yes, we should talk about that, but there are so many businesses on the edge of survival. And what a number of firms are saying to me, even in response to the Prime Minister's speech this week, was do not get ahead of ourselves in terms of the infrastructure investment, a big investment, fantastic, but we can't look beyond the end of next week. We must not forget that. So the kind of priorities we all need to be thinking about, how we get local lockdown right. The fact is that we are going to have to be able to do a Leicester lockdown, potentially in other places, very effectively, that will be massively important for business confidence. Testing needs to really work. We need frontline business testing so that businesses can get to work in ways that are productive. We are going to need more financial help. So in terms of the checklist for the Chancellor next week, we have a checklist not so different from the Core Cities checklist, but we would add there is going to need to be additional wage subsidy support, particularly for the hospitality sector and firms that are not able to open properly. All those arguments that I remember sitting around the table with Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, and Francis O'Grady just before lockdown began designing the JRS scheme. The arguments there were protect viable jobs so that when we are able to return to normal, they can return. The arguments that were valid in March will be valid at the end of the furlough scheme in October. There will need to be some form of extension. We do think we need more business rates relief to be extended. We do see the need for deferral of VAT payments. So yes, let's talk recovery, but do not forget about the urgency of survival. And I think that is a local and national message. The 14-day quarantine in aviation, we still don't have clarity around those so-called air bridges. That is a closed sign on our economy at the moment. And we understand as a business community the absolute sacrosanct nature of the health priority. And you would have seen that across the country in the way that businesses are opening safely. But do not underestimate the impact, the chilling impact on the economy of these short-term measures. And we need a risk-assessed approach to them. Schools and transport, Tony, you know, transport so much, you know, your field of expertise. We do not have clarity around how transport is going to open. We have an unclear picture around schools opening for business. 3 in 4 working parents are saying they can't manage effectively with their children at home to do their job at the same time. I actually don't quite know how the other quarter are managing. 3 out of 4 are really saying that that balancing of both doesn't matter. So the short term is still uppermost and must be uppermost in our minds. But, yes, we have the chance to talk recovery. And this phrase, Build Back Better, it's become a bit sloganized, but I think it counts for something. And we were pleased to see the aspiration that the Prime Minister set this week. Yes, there could have been more detail. Yes, there could have been potentially, I think we felt that there was a missing piece around skills that is going to be absolutely fundamental. But to have that infrastructure investment prioritised, the digital investment prioritised, we know how absolutely vital those are going to be. But I want to just absolutely echo Judith's case for we need to move at speed, at scale, and we need to move local. So you will hear a CBI voice backing the idea of greater devolution during this period. I think we have seen the power of local delivery on PPE, on disbursement of funding, and this is a moment we think to go further. Local communities know their skill gaps, they know their transport needs. This is a moment to really turbocharge devolution, we think. And we are going to be pushing, as the CBI, for a devolution framework this autumn. We do think that we need to break down those barriers that have existed for decades, and we do want to see some new devolution deals. And we would absolutely echo, you know, Andy Street's comment, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, he said economic recovery cannot be found in Whitehall. It must be done in the regions. I think it would be fair to say that the business community over the past decade has been somewhat ambivalent on devolution. That has changed. I think we have seen the power of local decision-making, and we will absolutely be backing that. I'm going to make a very final point, Tony, if I may, which is, I know Anand is coming on in a moment to talk about Brexit, but we all have to talk about Brexit, I'm afraid, because the idea of layering on a no-deal Brexit on top of the pandemic response is madness. When I talk to businesses across the country, the biggest message that they have for me is that we have no resilience to be able to deal with the kind of shock that we would have from a no deal, or indeed from a very skinny deal Brexit at the end of the year, and that the acceleration on both sides of this, this negotiation to get to something that protects jobs and communities is going to be absolutely vital. And we know that has a profound regional dimension. It has a profound impact on the cities of our country, particularly our northern cities. And much as we might like to bury it as an issue, we can't. It is back with us. So that is the perspective we have. I think that the emphasis on skills locally, at scale, at speed, that is what business is going to need. But do not forget that thousands of businesses are still in survival mode, and they are going to need more support over the next weeks, and we must not get behind the economic curve in supporting them. Thank you.
Carolyn, thank you. And again, as I said to Judith, you've been at the helm of the CBI in a remarkable period. So thanks to you too for keeping all these issues in the public eye, and again today. Now, Polly Billington, your institution, UK 100, is committed to cleaning, or working with local government to help create a cleaner and better environment and use of cleaner energy, and presumably out of what is a pretty dismal situation, not on anybody's fault, there are opportunities as well as threats. I don't want to steal your thunder, but go for it.
Thank you very much, Tony. Yeah, I couldn't agree with Carolyn more about the seriousness of the current crisis. I think it needs to be put into the context of the fact that a climate crisis could be equally, if not more, devastating. And I think that's what we need. This is the moment where we need to be making sure that we don't lock in fossil fuel dependency and therefore commit ourselves to a climate crisis in the future. I think there's lots of things that COVID has revealed to us about the structural weaknesses, both in our society and our economy, and therefore it's key now to be able to build up our resilience to climate change, so that we don't find ourselves in these kind of situations economically and in terms of health in the future. So the shift now needs to happen to a net zero economy. It is legislated in law to happen by 2050. Many of our members, there are more than 100 of them now. I can see from the attendee list, there's many of ours represented on this call. I have made that commitment to be able to start acting now on climate, and have actually made earlier commitments than shifting to net zero by 2050. So that needs to happen. And I agree totally with what Judith and Carolyn has said about any kind of recovery having to be place-based. Because if you're going to do the kind of things we need to be able to do for climate, they need to happen in places. There is so much you can do with decarbonising the electricity supply, which has been done very well by a range of governments of different hues, by things like offshore wind. The next tricky bit is actually in places. It's where we heat our homes and our buildings and how we move around. And those are the key challenges. So that's one of the reasons why, along with Judith, we're going to be, we launched this week, along with Judith and the Core Cities, we launched this week a task force, a resilient recovery task force with more than 20 leaders, including metropolitan mayors, to identify the priorities of what that recovery needs to look like that will strengthen the resilience of our communities in terms of the economy, health, and the environment, because that's what we'll need. And when you look at those three priorities of Core Cities, the fundamental recalibration and so forth, I would sort of add some kind of meat to some of those. We need to have a just transition reskilling package, a sort of new deal for skills and growth. The research that we published from the Grantham Institute at the LSE earlier this week, which revealed that there was nearly 2 million jobs will be more in demand if we shift to net zero, but more than 2 million people, their jobs will need to be significantly reskilled. That's what we need to be doing now. We can't wait any longer for those kind of things, particularly when you see where there are particular pockets of communities where there could be more need to do that transition sooner rather than later. We're talking about moving our car mechanics to be able to maintain and mend EVs, not just dirty old combustion engines. Oil and gas workers being retrained to install wind turbines, and our construction workers being ready to install retrofit energy efficiency measures, heat pumps, solar panels, EV charging points. None of this stuff is wacky anymore. All of this is entirely proven technology and actually could be part of a longer term investment in the kind of recovery, the resilient recovery we're talking about. And some of it could be done soon and now. Prepare the way for hydrogen, carbon capture and storage and other solutions for energy intensive industries. Because I know stuff jumps up in my Twitter feed about protecting the steel industry. Absolutely, but you protect the steel industry by getting it to be ready for the next kind of low carbon steel, rather than propping it up in an old way. So that's really important. And I think we also need to be thinking about what kind of role there is for regional banks and specialist banks in terms of finding the finance for this. Because if we simply think that this is all about asking for money from national government, local government knows what that's like. It comes with strings attached. And yes, of course, we need devolution in order to be able to raise that money locally. But quite often what really national government needs to be doing is shaping markets in order to be able to make that private finance flow. The Grantham Institute is publishing its report into banking on the just transition in a couple of weeks' time. And I would urge everybody to look out for what that's talking about in terms of doing that reskilling and working out that we have that shift properly in all of the places in which we live. Now, the Core Cities talks about catalytic infrastructure. Now, I know I've been around in politics far too long that what catalytic infrastructure can generally mean is something which a politician can stand cutting a ribbon or with a high-vis jacket and a hard hat on it. So what does that mean? It means roads and sometimes rail if you're lucky. Well, actually, we're talking catalytic infrastructure. It's smart energy technology, it's battery storage, it's district heating, it's retrofit of our homes. That is absolutely transformative in terms of people's lives, not only the people who live in those homes, but the people who do the work. And we've been talking as well about the risks and the vulnerabilities of cities and city living and density and so forth. We now need to be thinking about designing 15-minute city plans, walking and cycling. And if there's one thing that counts as catalytic infrastructure, it's broadband. If there's one thing we all know, fortunately, we've had this webinar at the right time of day. I know that if I'd had to join at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I can guarantee you I'd have probably dropped off. One final point, though, is that we need to be thinking about, if we're going to shape markets, that government uses its money wisely. The Prime Minister announced £5 billion worth of sort of New Deal on Tuesday. That amount of money could crowd in, we've analysed, up to £100 billion worth of private capital into local clean energy projects across the country, which hits your levelling up agenda, which hits your reskilling agenda, which hits your decarbonising agenda. A bank is needed that is thinking about deploying that money wisely to shift us to net zero. Otherwise, terrible though it might seem to think of COVID as an opportunity, this moment could be lost where we redesign our economy to be able to meet the challenges of net zero, because we have externalized the environmental costs of our economy for far too long. And that is going to end up falling really hard on businesses and our workforce. I'd say one more thing about enterprise zones, because I've been around it long enough to know that sometimes enterprise zones can work and sometimes they can't. We need to be thinking more about those, focusing on those 15-minute communities. Zones need to be designed along the grain of existing communities and understand where previous zones have contributed to community failure and locked in carbon dependency. So this might not sound quite as immediate as some of the stuff that Carolyn's been talking about, but if we think about this context when making the decisions about what needs to happen immediately, we may avoid locking in some of the disastrous investments that could end up meaning that we end up with a bigger crisis later on. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Polly. And clearly it is a reset moment for the economy. And to state the very obvious, this can be done better or worse. And I think it's an elegant argument for doing it better. James Palmer, you're on next. City regional mayors or metropolitan mayors have been much in the news latterly and have a big role in the economic development of their areas, and presumably as the mayor of an area that contains two great but very different places, towns, cities, you are much involved in thinking about the future as well.
Well, absolutely we are, and much involved in thinking about the present and the future, and how we mould the present to shape the future, of course. And one thing that we look at is historical data, as well as as what we're doing at the moment. And historically, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough has done pretty well in times of recession. Cambridge itself has not been in recession for some 40 odd years. So we feel that we can be a beacon for growth and a beacon for the economy. And of course, outside of London, there's only us and a little bit around Bristol that actually plays into the UK economy. So we are massively important to UK PLC as well. So it's terribly important that we bring innovation alongside investment and make sure that we are looking at investing in the right way, bearing in mind other speakers that have been before me, to deliver growth that's sustainable and environmentally sensitive, and it's absolutely key that we do that. I did note actually one of the contributors or one of the audience mentioned about the high streets. What are we going to do for the high streets? We've been engaged very much in reopening the city centres of our two cities, and a lot of the talk has come about how can high streets change their offer to become places of vibrancy for longer, and a lot of discussion around shops opening later in the morning and open later at night, and creating that bar culture and cafe culture and shopping culture, which we know, of course, from summer in Europe, and whether we can bring that into a British, slightly rainy and occasionally lovely and sunny economy. But I think what's absolutely clear is if we just allow our city centres to sit on the laurels and do what they've always done, they will not meet the challenge. And it's up to us as a combined authority to encourage our composite councils to be as flexible as possible, and they are being, to allow businesses to innovate. And innovation, I think, will be the key that moves us beyond where we currently are. Certainly investment, and it has been mentioned that Revaluation does come with strings. Well, it does come with some, but it does come with the ability to invest directly into the economy. And the Command Authority in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, having the LEP integrated into it, has allowed us to invest in the last 6 months, £38 million directly into the Cambridgeshire economy, supporting innovation, education, and skills. And this is money that, you know, you talk about Abbey Street. Well, he said this is money that we are able to deliver where Westminster simply cannot, and we are much more focused in what we're trying to achieve. And also, we also reacted very, very much to the issue around some of the Treasury money in COVID-19 in the height of it, not meeting sole traders and small businesses. And we were able to give capital grant funding of around 6 million, again, directly into our economy, creating jobs in the height of the outbreak. We created over 250 jobs purely by investing into capital grants into small businesses. Our longer term plans, of course, revolve around transformational infrastructure, and what we're trying to prove in Cambridgeshire is that you can have world-class public transport in a rural area with smaller populations. That's not really been done anywhere in the world. It's certainly not been done in the UK. The standardised thinking is that if you want world-class public transport, you've got to have populations of 500,000 plus in a city area. What we are going to achieve with Cam Metro is the most innovative transport solution in the world, and it will of course be designed entirely around environmental concerns, and its job will be to create a platform for growth again, which is linked entirely to the best possible solutions for the environment in the growth that we must achieve to feed our economy. So innovation and investment, direct investment into the right kind of infrastructure, taking away dependence on the car, creating brand new garden village sites, creating the built environment that is necessary to give people the best kind of living, but also protecting the very beauty and nature of our villages and towns that we have, and not overdeveloping them in the wrong possible way. That's absolutely key to what we're trying to do in the combined authority. And yeah, we're lucky. You know, we've not been hit heavily by COVID, and as I said, historically our economy is strong, but we've got to make sure that we put the right investment in now to give global confidence into Cambridgeshire. And you know, Cambridge itself is one of the top destinations for science and innovation. It certainly is the top destination for science and innovation in Europe. With the right investment into the right infrastructure now, we will be able to see Cambridge compete with San Francisco, Boston, Shanghai, etc. And that's exactly where we are putting ourselves. And that's why we need to spread the wealth of Cambridge across the whole of Cambridgeshire through the Cam Metro and level up our area, because of course alongside those massively successful economies, we also have, as everybody does, areas of deprivation that need to be solved, and they will not be solved unless we connect them to successful education and business opportunities. So we have a very clear vision of where we're going. COVID, I believe, will actually help us get to where we want to go, because the knowledge and understanding that we'll be able to bring into our innovative technology will drive forward greater and better transport solutions. We've got some of the top brains in Cambridge, and there's some pretty decent brains in Cambridge, to be honest, working on the scheme that we have. And our vision is not just to create a transport network around here and a platform for growth and world-class housing, but also to create a system that's so successful we can sell it across the world to similar cities. We know there are other cities in the UK, Oxford, for example, that suffers horrendously from traffic issues, but there are others around the world, and the platform that we're building, the transport solution that we will build, will become a business opportunity as well, and it's imperative that we keep hold of the patents, etc., for that, to allow the engineering success of Peterborough to be used alongside this technology worldwide. So we have a clear plan for innovation, a clear plan for investment, a clear plan for the environment, and that's exactly what we're doing now in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and we believe it will create strength to the economy here, but also that strength will create waves nationally for UK PLC too.
Okay, thanks, James. Thank you very much. And a very clear picture of what you're doing, particularly the transport solutions you're proposing for for Peterborough, Cambridge, and indeed the county between. Polly's had to leave us, unfortunately, had a prior engagement, but our final, but by no means least speaker is Anand Menon. And we are back to our old friend, I guess, Brexit, which, as I said earlier on, we used to obsess about, and now we're going to have to obsess about in parallel with COVID-19. So, Anand, over to you.
Thanks, Tony. I'm aware that I'm now officially eating into debate time, so I'll go as quickly as I might rattle through this quite quickly. And I'm going to try and give a bit of broader context, partly about Brexit. Brexit, of course, has happened, and given that we didn't ask for an extension yesterday, we will leave the single market and the customs union at the end of this year. I think it is perfectly possible we'll get a deal. Both sides want a deal, and the sticking points, and I'm happy to talk about these in questions, are not irresolvable. However, it's worth saying that in economic terms, while there is a significant difference between deal and no deal, it is in many ways quite small, because given the time that we have, any kind of Brexit deal we get will be one that removes tariffs and quotas. But as all the forecasts from economists and indeed from the government itself has shown, tariffs aren't the real issue when it comes to trade. The real issue are non-tariff barriers like standards, and the insistence on autonomy and of not being under EU rules means that our standards are going to diverge or potentially diverge post-Brexit, which means we face a load of additional hurdles when it comes to trading with the European Union, even if we give a deal, and even if we get a deal. And to give you some sense of the scale we're thinking of, our modelling suggests that on the aggregate, and these are economic forecasts, so you can take them with a pinch of salt, the impact of the kind of deal we're likely to get is 5 to 7% of GDP over a decade, as opposed to 9% of GDP over a decade if we don't get a deal. That being said, it's worth saying politically, a deal is significantly better than no deal, because if we don't get a deal, we will enter a phase of mutual recrimination and finger pointing with the European Union that will impede our ability to cooperate or even play nicely together for a significant amount of time. And I'd suggest that at a moment when the world is changing as quickly as it is, and we have a pandemic to deal with jointly if possible, this would be a bad time to engage in a fight or a row with our European partners. The thing I want to focus on is, above and beyond those aggregates, is the sort of regional impact of all of this. What you see in front of you is the Brexit map. That is how England, and apologies to the Scots and people from Northern Ireland, I'm just doing England, this is how we voted in the referendum. And thinking about what pattern there is there, I got thinking about this when Rory Stewart announced he was standing to be mayor of London. And one of his first interviews, Rory was asked what his favourite pub in London was. And being Rory, he said Pret, which is one of the weirdest things you're ever going to hear. And this got me thinking, if you could stick the next slide on, please. There is a socio-economic significance to what he said about Pret, because if you look at that map, the stars are the locations of Prets in the United Kingdom, and there's an uncanny correlation there between Pret and Remain. The reason being, of course, that Pret sets themselves up in places that are young, dynamic, with flourishing economies, and the rest of the country voted to leave. So Brexit already, if you like, expressed, in part at least, frustration at the sort of socio-economic divides within this country. And it's because of Brexit that both Theresa May and subsequently Boris Johnson have shown this interest in rebalancing, in the just about managing, because they knew that part of the Brexit vote was about socio-economic discontent. The problem going forward, I think, with the levelling up agenda is it's not just the pre-existing inequalities we're going to have to deal with, but the exacerbation of those inequalities because of both COVID and Brexit. If I could have the next slide, please. What this slide shows are the 20 places that are going to be least hit in terms of jobs as a result of the coronavirus. You'll again notice that they tend to be those Pret areas, those relatively affluent areas. So it is the places that were already not doing well that are disproportionately at risk from the economic impact of COVID in terms of jobs. And of course, on top of COVID, we have at the end of the year the economic impact of Brexit, which we haven't felt yet because we're still trading with the EU as we did when we were a member state. And if I can have the final slide, please. This is, if you like, the double whammy. And the double whammy is that there is a pretty neat correlation between how strongly a region voted to leave and how exposed its economy is to trade with the European Union. So a levelling up agenda that even back in 2016 would have been impossible to manage in one term and hard to manage in 2 or 3 parliamentary terms is made all the more difficult by the fact that we are superimposing on those pre-existing inequalities Brexit and COVID effects that will serve only to make them worse. So I hope that I've cheered you all up immensely with that. I think that's about 5 minutes. So Tony, if it's all right, I'll leave it there.
Great, Anand, and you always cheer us up. Good news or bad, thank you for that. I'm going to open it straight to questions, well, nearly straight to questions. The issue of transport and the future of offices and city centres is inevitably in certainly the minds of anybody operating company or city government in a largish city. And I just wonder, how long do you think it's going to take to get people confident to get back into city centres by public transport? It seems to me key to a whole range of issues, including the future of the creative industries, theatre in particular, but not only that. I mean, Judith, presumably you're already beginning to think about how you can, within the bounds of safety, get everybody working back in Leeds city centre.
Yes, of course, it's absolutely central to everything we're doing. And one of the main, I think, criticisms of some of the way that things have been handled is the eroding of confidence. And it's very interesting talking to people right now. There are those, there does seem to be a great divide between those who feel that the virus isn't going to impact on them, and we've seen the behaviours that have come from that, and actually as a result of those behaviours, some of the anxiety that's prevalent actually growing for many people. We've done a survey of our own staff, and around 80% of people returning the survey said they would be very comfortable continuing to work predominantly from home, and I think that's the experience that the response that we're getting from businesses who've been doing similar work. So obviously our focus at the moment is to make the city, city centres across the country as safe as possible. So extending barriers, making sure that there's pedestrian areas. It's not just a question of travelling on transport itself, it's the experience at stations, waiting, buying tickets, all of those things where you spill out onto very crowded areas on platforms, all of the horrendous picture that we've had through the timetabling disaster across the north of England over the last 2 years, for example. So a huge amount of work on confidence, messaging, and I don't think we've yet got the communication where it needs to be. And I'm very keen that in all the work that we do, that we involve behavioural scientists as well as scientists around the actual medical impacts. And I think it's that the quality of that messaging and that real sense that we're on top of the testing and tracing, that we're working with people and not imposing on people the measures that we need to take going forward. And I think the overwhelming message is that we have to accept that we're living with the virus in our communities at the moment and keep reinforcing that, because there's going to be nothing like further local lockdowns to really undermine a lot of the work that we've been doing collectively. But I think the jury's out, but we will have to be looking at other ways of attracting people to come into our city centres. But of course, perversely, more people are staying at home, and there are signs in some areas that their local communities and local district centres are starting to benefit from that. So, we have to keep looking in the round and, safety first at the moment, but really doing everything we can to listen to the business community as well, and make sure that we all have a voice in the local outbreak boards that we've put together, really working together to take us forward.
Okay, I think Carolyn and James, you want anything to say, or Anand indeed, about this sort of issue of confidence and getting people back to work within the bounds of safety, which seems to me an incredibly difficult balance for public authorities and businesses to get right. Yeah,
it is difficult, but equally it is the responsibility of local authorities to get it right. And what we're seeing, I know it's very early days, what we're seeing in our cities is that actual fact, football is going up around 12% a week. And as I said, it is early days, but that's encouraging. What that suggests is that more people that use the shops and more people become confident that they can also go into our city centres. And I think it will be a game changer this weekend. I don't expect our city centres to be full of rolling drunks. There's been portrayed in the media. I think that people are beyond that. But clearly, part of using the city centre, part of a Saturday shopping trip or any shopping trip, is people being able to eat as well. It's, I was talking earlier about the new way to look at city centres as somewhere to go for a complete day out as such. So, but you do it later in the day, and encourage more and more people to eat and have a glass of wine or something when they're shopping. So I'd be very interested to see how much that will move forward. It is absolutely important that clearly we consider all issues, and we've been working with our town centres teams together for the last 6-7 weeks now, planning ahead for, first of all, the shops opening and now the bars and restaurants. And clearly, and I think your early question said about public transport as well. And again, I think it will just be baby steps, and we will begin to see that people become less afraid of the virus and more willing to spend their time outside. And nationally, it seems that it's pretty much a 50-50 split of people who really want to get back to things and really want to get back to normal, and others who are considerably concerned about doing so. But time, I believe, will be the healer in this. And as long as we don't have massive second spikes, I'm confident that come the next, things have moved rapidly in the last 4 weeks. I think things will move rapidly again over the next 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay, thanks. And briefly, Carolyn, I mean, business and transport, and are we? And since I suppose businesses may be neutral about whether or not they work from offices in the future. Tom Bridges from Arup has asked a question about this, but could be cost savings, I guess, for many businesses for working if more people work at home. You're muted, Carolyn.
I think it's really interesting, this question about offices working from home, and I think it has been successful. So many of us are working productively at home, but I've just begun to hear in the last few weeks businesses saying, actually, we're getting quite a lot of feedback from employees, particularly younger employees, for whom actually being part of a community is a big part of how you learn, it's part of your social life, and actually creativity is much harder at a distance. People are learning that. Transactions, fine. I think a conference like this, terrific. But actually when you're really trying to crack a difficult problem. So I don't think we should get too carried away with this idea that suddenly everybody is going to work from home. And I think we're going to see a hybrid model developing. And it is one of the things I think that is, that can get lost, and I think it's come through in this conversation, is how absolutely vital the office culture is to a lot of our hospitality sector. One of my members phoned me from Regent Street. They were in their office in Regent Street looking down the street. All the shops were open. There was nobody there because the offices are not back. So I am hoping that we will see offices being allowed to come back. In many other countries, they moved quite quickly on that. Italy moved very fast to bringing offices back because they recognised it was part of the bustle and life of a vibrant city. So I don't think we should get too carried away with this being the entire transformation of our future.
Okay, very good. And I must say, I've been wondering myself what kind of message it will send out. It's the government encourages, and of course local authorities will have a duty to ensure parents have their children educated in schools beyond a point. So September will arrive, schools are supposed to be back, and yet officials running the government may not be. I mean, and best of luck explaining that. But anyway, I want now to bring in a question from Andy Bounds of the Financial Times. Andy, if you're unmuted, you should be on.
Oh, hello, everyone. Thanks very much, Tony. I just wanted to ask everyone, it's a wish list, really. What would you like to hear from the Chancellor next week? You know, very, the main thing. And do you think you will hear it?
Judith.
Yeah.
Okay, no, Judith, you're the signatory to the Core Cities demands. Kindly ask questions of the Chancellor. What do you really want from?
Well, I mean, it's if I speak with my local authority hat on, it's a commitment to the promise that they would recompense what it has taken us to deal with the crisis, and but also the loss of income that we're suffering. And there is some talk of that today. I'm not convinced we'll get everything that we need, but at the moment too much attention has been focused on our own financial plight, and we need to be focusing 100% on the support that we can give across all of the sectors to really work on the agenda that we've been outlining today. And I think that's really the focus. But huge interest in the infrastructure promises that have come from government. We've argued for a long time, right across infrastructure in its broadest sense, that this is really a route out of so many of the situations that we face at the moment. So we need to see far more flesh on the bone and much more commitment in terms of the funding that we'll need to support that going forward. Okay, great. James? Your wish list or top item on your wish list for the Chancellor?
Well, I mean, I think to a certain extent, you can always go cap in hand to the government and ask for money. And of course, the government have been very profligate recently and giving away a lot of money. And there are things, of course, we are grateful for, and that we will be bidding for again, like all authorities. Equally, though, it is about how you use your influence locally to make sure that the business is open and how the business is delivering. So I think it's also about encouraging the local economy, making sure that you are engaging with local businesses, making sure that you are open for business and that the rest of the world knows you're open for business. So there's more than just give us money and we'll spend it. It's creating the environment where business can thrive. And that's exactly what we are currently doing through our investments, of course, through the creation of the new Peterborough University, through our skills agenda, and through our levelling up of adult education. So we are doing everything we can to try and bolster that growth in the economy here. But of course, money from the Chancellor is welcome, and we will invest even more of it, even more wisely as it comes along. And as you would expect, I am engaging Judith and others with the Chancellor on a regular basis to make sure that Cambridgeshire does get its share. But you know, that it's more than just money. It's about creating the environment for success.
Thanks. I will ask Carolyn. I'm not ignoring you, Anand, but I'll bring you in on another issue, a rather bigger one, especially for you in a minute.
Answer as well. Go.
Right. Do you want it? No, you're very welcome. No, Carolyn, you mentioned the challenge of the way the furlough scheme is withdrawn. But I mean, is that really the sort of top of your list, or where would your?
It's broader than that. I would say absolute top of our list is a laser-like focus on unemployment and the jobs market in the short run. I mean, we do want to see the investment side, but I think the immediate emergency is about jobs and employment. So I think we want to see two things. The first is we want to see something big on job protection and something big on job creation. And on job protection, we're not saying it has to be an extension of the furlough scheme. The furlough scheme is extremely blunt. It's been successful because of that, but something targeted that protects jobs in those highly vulnerable sectors, hospitality, tourism, aviation, we know the list. So something big on that, but job creation is going to be absolutely fundamental. The market will work over time. I agree with James, you know, we don't want to go cap in hand all the time. There is jobs creation happening now, but the state has a very important role to play in facilitating that. And something around a future jobs fund. We had one after the financial crash. It was successful. Something on that mould, but it will need to be far, far bigger. And a future skills fund, which accelerates the retraining that we need to be able to create the skill base to swap out 26 million boilers to build the sustainable energy of the future. And we would like to see that delivered in a devolved way where possible, because local skills really matter. So those would be our main asks.
And what about further education? I mean, what you're describing sounds to me as if FE badly treated over many years in terms of funding. Sounds to me as if further education is going to need a very significant boost to help this transition, because a lot of this sounds to me like at least as much, some of it's at universities, but some of it's definitely FE in schools. Is that right?
Totally right. And one of the things we know from past recessions is that unemployment affects the youngest most, and that 6 months of unemployment is scarring for life. And the role that our FE colleges, which were underfunded before, now the government had really stepped in to increase their funding. I think looking at how that is now used in partnership with local businesses to really turbocharge those skill schemes, I think it could be very exciting. And we've seen some really good examples of that. When the Honda plant closure was announced in Swindon, the local authorities working with local FE colleges and local business created a really effective retraining package for the region. So we have best practice to build on. But yes, Tony, you're absolutely right. FE has to be a really big part of all of this.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to come on to you, Anand, in a moment. I want now to ask Heather Jameson, who is the editor of the MJ, Municipal Journal. Heather, if you're ready with your question, now is the time.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Tony, and thank you to all the panelists. It's been a great session so far. I just wanted to, I mean, basically the same sort of question, sort of about the finance, isn't it? But I would, with the deprived areas much harder hit by this, and the Boris Johnson announcements focusing much more on capital investment, is there a danger that the sort of revenue, the supporting people side of local government isn't supported as much? And also, as a sort of supplementary side to that, I would also ask if businesses are going to be in a position, because they're struggling too, are they going to be in a position to be able to add additional tax take in order to support the difficult financial position that the government's in now?
So do you mean at the end, Heather, our businesses, do you think businesses will face tax increases? Is that the point you're...
Yeah, will they be able to accept tax increases? Never mind, will they be supportive thereof?
I have a funny feeling they'll be expecting temporary tax cuts, but it's a great question. Actually, look, can I leave that one for you in a second, Carolyn? Let's send to Anand, because you did mention this question of the way in which both the potential impacts of Brexit and COVID-19 appear to reinforce some of the regional and area-based inequalities and problems that the levelling up agenda is intended to cope with. And I mean, Heather's point is, you know, capital expenditure, we all love capital expenditure, but the truth is some of its impacts may take some time to work through, when the short-term need is going to be resources for individuals who are made unemployed or think they're about to be, or on shorter hours. So what about this trade-off between capital investment and people?
Well, I saw the question in a slightly different way, in terms of long-term investment in people rather than... I mean, I absolutely agree with Carolyn and what she said, that the focus of what the government should be saying on the economy is about job creation and job retention, and that's the short term, if you like. But I think the danger with the capital spending is that levelling up is seen as a primarily political rather than an economic agenda. That is to say, we do things that you can see happening in time for the next election without addressing some of the sort of fundamental drivers of inequality. And skills is absolutely key to that. Investing in people is absolutely key to that. Now that's going to take time, but actually what we need, because remember, we're not dealing with regional inequality from the last few years. We're dealing with regional inequality that's built over decades, and it's going to take decades to fix. So what we need is something that sounds and feels a bit like a long-term plan, whereby investing in people in some of these regions is absolutely as crucial as digging a hole and saying this is Boris's infrastructure, which I suspect is going to be the sort of centerpiece of what the government is doing. If I can add one more thing, Tony, for the previous question, in terms of what I'd like to hear from the Chancellor, what I really don't want to hear from the Chancellor is a VAT cut. A cut to VAT strikes me as the wrong solution to any of the problems we're facing at the moment. And if there's one company that doesn't need a revenue boost at the moment, it's Amazon. And it strikes me that they're the people that will do the best out of it.
Okay, well, that's a pretty clear view where you don't want something, which is a nice, clear message. Carolyn, what about your members? Do they, what would their view on the sort of business tax take question be?
Well, it's interesting, actually, Anand said that, because we agree on the VAT cut. The thing about a VAT cut is it's completely non-discriminatory. You know, every business would benefit. And what we know is that the effect of this pandemic has been highly differentiated by sector and by firm. We'd much rather see targeted tax cuts to encourage investment in enabling parts of the economy. So, for example, having a VAT tax cut on electric vehicles could be a very interesting thing to do. So why don't, it goes back to this point of, you know, let's do things now that do build us towards the long-term goals we have around levelling up and around a sustainable economy. I think that the capital versus people point is a really good one. We have. It is quite tempting to always, the big levers that the governments can reach for are about infrastructure. And in general, you know, we would support that because you create jobs, you immediately create jobs. We know it's a very Keynesian response. But just going back to where we were pre-crisis, we know we had the most extraordinary retraining challenge. We did some work with McKinsey last year. 9 in 10 people will need retraining of some sort, and that was pre-crisis. So that investment in people and how we align that with the challenge around unemployment, I'd like to see the two going hand in hand, and how we make sure that we are prioritising people through all of this. It's been a very, very human crisis, and if anything, I think it has increased our level of awareness and concern about how we care for people through the crisis. I think retraining and reskilling will be a very big part of that.
Tony, you're muted.
No, I've Noted. I'm trying to do two things at once and not even doing either of them. The future of business rates. The revaluation of business rates that was due for 2021 is now being postponed, and that surely means that for many for many businesses, they're going to end up paying business rates on the basis of an entirely different economy back in 2015 when the last revaluation was done. Seems to me business rates can't survive, can they? Or at least they can't survive on the basis of these valuations, particularly given the Amazon point, and the online traders. I mean, Judith, do you think core cities, local government more generally, is going to have to lobby hard for some kind of longer-term solution to the business rate issue?
No, I absolutely agree, and particularly through our models of devolution, business rates have been one of the areas where there's been benefit in terms of finances locally. So absolutely, we already suffered in West Yorkshire from losing the pilot this year and a massive hole in our budgets from that. So absolutely agree that it's an area that we need to focus on. And just picking up on Heather's point, the people side of what we need to do is absolutely critical for us going forward. And that's why we focus so heavily through Core Cities on inclusive growth and recognising that inequality is one of the major drawbacks in terms of moving forward in an economic, progressing the economy in local areas. And where we've seen the virus hitting, to have a situation where local areas are having to reduce their spend on public health, for example, when we're going through the biggest public health crisis, is just one area that we need to be allowed to get across. And it's that bringing together all of those things at a local area that is so important. So all of the knock-on impacts can be brought together. And infrastructure is important, but it needs to be, the jobs that are created need to be accessible to local communities. And it's that, perfect relationship of bringing together business, education, and local authorities really being the glue, if you like, that brings all that together. And I think our convening power is so often underestimated in that agenda. So much to discuss, but absolutely, business rates cannot be relied upon in the way that we have been led to believe they would be a major source of income for us.
Great, thanks. I'm going to ask you, James, to say a brief word in a second, but I'm going to tee up Councillor John Merry who's the chair of the Key Cities Group on next, and then John Healy from Allstate in Northern Ireland. We'll see if we can get one or two questions after that if I speed up. James.
Yes, I mean, just on the taxation thing, what would I do? I would drop corporation tax as low as possible. I wouldn't even be afraid of taking it down to zero, and I'd encourage international companies to relocate into our most deprived areas and bring business opportunities in that way. And of course, without the European Union, with their absolute freedom to do so. And I think that is a way that you can really begin to solve more than you can with just infrastructure. I don't know if government will do it, whether they'll be bold enough to, but it would be, for me, it would be an absolutely fantastic statement internationally to say, come and do business in the UK. Interesting points on business rates. I think it depends where you are, and of course, in our area, the business rates are very strong, and we would absolutely love to have devolved fiscal devolution through business rates or any other way, and of course, we're discussing with the Chancellor on those issues. But what is quite clear, and I think the point's been alluded to, but it's quite clear that having business rates for massive sheds at a low level and having business rates for town centres at a very high level is something that's got to be sorted out. We can't continue along those lines.
Okay, very good. Now, John Merry.
Hiya. Key Cities Group, which represents the cities outside of the core cities, and I'm also Deputy Mayor of Salford as well. And I suppose I agreed with almost every word of what Judith said in terms of her introduction. But what I'm concerned about is how do we as cities, all cities, work together for economic recovery? How can we bring all urban areas together on a unified agenda which encompasses all urban areas so that we're collaborating rather than competing?
Well, that seems aimed pretty directly at you, Judith, so I'm going to give it straight to you. Urban Together, I can see a new brand name, Urban Together. Go for it.
I've got no argument with that at all. And I hope my comments at the beginning actually made that clear, that it's absolutely crucial that we do establish better relations. That's why we mentioned, we've got to make sure that we don't bring division into that debate. I think that some of the rhetoric over the last couple of years, if I'm honest, has sort of led towards a sort of either or debate, which actually can't be the way forward. It's got to be that full inclusion and actually recognising, if you take transport, for example, if you do invest in the larger projects coming up, how does that actually benefit the wider area in terms of freeing up capacity? The arguments that we and discussions that we have around those debates. But I've worked with John for a very long time, we are going to be working together on this, and let's make sure that everyone does feel included in how we move forward. And it is that relationship between us that is so important, and we don't want anything in the core city agenda that we're doing to be seen at the expense of the really important areas around us. So looking forward to those conversations going forward.
Okay, thanks. Just to ensure I get maximum questions, sorry, Anand, I'll come to you in a moment. John Healy, also.
Hey, Tony. Thanks very much. And I have to say, it's been a great discussion this morning, and thanks to all the panelists for your insights. By way of introduction, I'm the immediate past president of the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce and also the managing director of the largest technology company in Northern Ireland. So I agree wholeheartedly on the importance of skills for the recovery and the investment in infrastructure, both physical and digital. But I'm interested in your views on the importance of city deals. We've obviously got the big city deal for Belfast. There's one for Derry in the northwest as well, and just interested in your perspective around the importance of city deals for a regional economy like Northern Ireland.
Okay, now it's a great question. Actually, Dan Wincott, who's part of the UK and a Changing Europe team, I think you can get Dan up as well, because he's got a couple of questions, but one about, we have been a bit England focused this morning, which is understandable. And I'll bring the others in the line here. So Dan, do you want to put your question?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, very good.
Excellent. I just wanted to ask really whether there were lessons from the devolved experience in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland that might be relevant for England, both in relation to their involvement, which has been problematic in Brexit processes, but also, and in particular, in relation to their record during the COVID pandemic emergency. I guess my sense is that devolution across the UK is sort of asymmetric, ad hoc, involves the sort of dispensation of powers from the centre to various places. And that has potentially the virtue of fitting those powers to the characteristics of particular places, but it also creates quite a complex overall architecture, which may make things more difficult. So are there lessons?
Very good. And now I'm going to take two more questions and then go back to the panel to pick and choose from among them. So Mike Hawking from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, you're next, I hope.
Hi there, hopefully you can hear me.
We can.
Great. So I was wondering if the panel thought that we've talked a lot about infrastructure versus sort of people investment. And I think when we think about revenue spending, some of the asks are from local government for support for their services versus investment in people, and whether government may trade off those two things. So in terms of support for frontline public services versus that sort of revenue support for skills and other things that might help to support and grow economies.
Sorry, very good, very clear. Thanks a lot. Jonathan Werran, Chief Executive of or Director of Localis. Forgive me, Jonathan, I'm giving you the wrong title, certainly from Localis.
Hi, that's fine. Quick question. How does the panel see the role of social value as a means to drive up Build Back Better recovery, use of commissioning of local services, and also aiding the renewal of the high streets and town centres, which James was adverting to earlier?
Okay, again, short and sharp. Now, I'm going to come to you, Anand, to tackle some of these broader, across the UK issues. Over to you.
Can you just summarise the Northern Ireland question? Because I got sort of a lot of distortion during that. I think it's
okay, well, let John repeat your question.
Sorry, John.
No, it's all right, John, for Anand.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, I was just focusing on the conversation that was developing on skills, and then also around the importance of the investment in infrastructure, both the physical and digital infrastructure for the region here. And I wanted to get your views on the importance of the city deal that has just been awarded to Belfast, and if you were getting to spend some of that money coming through on the city deal, how would you do it?
Well,
and if you could add to this Dan Wincott's question about can we learn anything from Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland?
Well, the second bit of the question, I'd defer to someone who knows Belfast and Northern Ireland significantly better than myself, rather than asking me what I would do. I think the city deal.
Judith may have some ideas, but because you're an expert on city deals. Come back to Judith in a moment for that.
I think the city deal is very important, and I think one of the interesting things for me is that, of course, Northern Ireland has a special status in the context of the Brexit deal, and actually this could be an opportunity to attract businesses to Northern Ireland, I think, because of course businesses there would have the ability to trade both east-west and north-south in a way that companies in the rest of Great Britain won't be able to. So I think that context needs to be taken into account as well when I'm thinking about Northern Ireland. And I think there are real significant opportunities there. On Dan's question, and rather cynically, I'd say the first lesson we should learn is we should all learn about devolution, because on a number of occasions during this crisis, it has occurred to me that people in Westminster don't really understand the devolution settlement and ought to learn about it. I think, though, it's too soon. I mean, there will be lessons to learn. I don't think I can say what they are now, because we might not even be halfway through this thing. So ultimately, when the data is in and we can compare reactions with outcomes, there will be lessons to learn from the various devolved responses and how they compare with what's been done in London. But I would say it's probably too soon as yet to know.
Okay.
Sorry, Tony, that was really unsatisfactory, I know.
No. Well, I think Dan might have been the right, Dan himself might have been asking a question which he would be the right person to answer, I suspect. But Judith, what about your advice to Belfast and its city deal? You're an expert in this stuff.
Yeah, so obviously we're running out of time. I
know. I'm sorry to do this to you.
So anything, just to frame, all of the comments, anything that leads to turbocharged devolution is good in my books. And I think the questions actually reflect the fact that we haven't got devolution yet. And I think that it would be true to say that that's in the devolved nations as well, that they would agree that there's still a long way to go moving towards true devolution. But certainly, what we need to move towards is a real discussion about fiscal devolution, which we've touched upon earlier. But certainly, all of the lessons that we've learned from the city deals, the growth deals that we've experienced, is about our ability to perform so much better at a local level when we have the resource and the powers to actually move ahead. So we quote from a West Yorkshire perspective the skills work that we were able to do under our deal, which led to us, successful outcomes around 7 or 8 out of 10 for young people, as against 3 to 4 with the DWP sponsored programs. So much to learn. Obviously, we're in the position of having literally the last thing we did before COVID really hit us hard was to sign our devolution deal for West Yorkshire. So it's an area that's very close to our hearts in this part of the world. So I would say, yes, of course, we always need to learn from the experience of other areas, and we work particularly closely with Cardiff through Core Cities, and we obviously have a good relationship through Glasgow as well, and we haven't been able to get quite the same political tie-up with Northern Ireland, but we'd be more than happy to share the experience and the work we've got. But it is that, and Carolyn has left the call, but it was really such a strong message from her that, you know, the focus on devolution has to now be taken seriously, and it has to be real devolution that gives us the ability to respond and act at really at the level where we can have the greatest impact.
Okay, now we're running out of time, as you rightly and wisely observed, Judith. I want to bring Charlotte Aldridge's question in before we stop taking questions from the floor, as it were. Charlotte.
Well, I'm not quite sure which question you wanted me to pose, so you've caught me on the hop a little bit there.
Ask any question you would like to pose. I'm not choosing the questions of your excellent questions. You go for the one that you most like some comment on in the remaining seconds.
Well, I think having spoken to central government over the last few days and weeks, I think the level of surprise at the suggestion that responses should be locally led in dealing with the scale of unemployment that we face, I think is something that we need to combat. And so I guess this is a question for Judith. What's our best case for saying to central government that as much as it wants to plan and deliver, although I query whether that, a national kind of public works programme or whatever, what is our best case for saying that, no, this has to be locally led?
Okay, very good. Now, I think I'm just going very rapidly through the chat, and others feel free to do that. I think we've covered most of the points in the chat. Forgive me if I haven't got to one that you've put in there. I've got, in the remaining seconds, what I'd like to do is to ask each of the panelists, perhaps beginning with James, who I haven't spoken to for a while, if you'd like to comment on any of these points made, and perhaps particularly we haven't touched on Jonathan Warren's point about social value. I don't know if any of the three of you would like to do that, but James.
Yeah, no, I was going to comment on the social value point earlier, and it's a point that's really well made, actually, and our reliance, of course, in our towns and cities on that social value is absolutely key. And I think that what we've seen, certainly in the work that we've done in getting city centres reopened, is a renewed sort of vigour for local enterprises, social enterprises, etc., to be involved. And I think that you can try and focus, as a politician, often you can focus on big infrastructure has been mentioned and big business, but it's really that's those small individuals that make all the difference, particularly in cities and town centres. And I think that it's a really, really good point. The other point I wanted to bring up was the service support versus infrastructure. Always a tricky one, and obviously as a mayor, I don't have to look after social care in Cambridgeshire, and if it was a leader of the county council, he might have a different point of view. But I think that there is clearly a recognition from government that whilst the cuts that came in for local government were probably necessary at the time, they've perhaps gone a little bit further than needed, and there needs to be a redress of that. And I think you have when you are in government, I think you clearly have different pots where money comes from, and I think that one should not supplement the other. But it is important that we make sure that social care, of course, is covered. And I think one of the things that will come out of COVID is an honest appraisal of the relationship between the National Health Service and the social care system. And I, for one, have long advocated that social care needs to be in with health under one ask and one solution. And I think that that's really the way forward for social care. So I'm an advocate of actually taking social care responsibility away from councils, leaving them to deal with the day-to-day issues that they deal with, and bringing social care into the health system.
Great, thank you. Anand, any final thoughts or references to any of the questions that have come up at the end here?
I mean, it does strike me that the answer to a lot of the questions we've asked is that we need to have an honest debate about the place and status of local and regional government in England, let alone the devolves that Dan was talking about. We need to be honest about the scarring that is still affecting them from years of austerity. We need to think about letting local populations have greater control over budgets and policy decisions in their areas. The problem is that I think every fibre in the body of this government is centralising. The early impressions of this government is it's one that wants to do everything from London and doesn't want to let autonomy slip, even within London, actually, to other institutions, let alone to institutions around the country. So I think, you know, whilst the best arguments in the world might be mustered to present to Westminster and Whitehall as good reasons why power should be devolved, I suspect they're not going to get all that much of a hearing from this particular Prime Minister and government.
Okay, well, pessimistic but realistic. Thanks for that. And Judith, we started with you, and so we shall end.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Just around social value, absolutely, and you know, a lot of work happening across local authorities around supply chain, procurement, absolutely at the top of our agenda right now. I think, in response to Charlotte's point, we have to speak in a language that, you know, will be listened to. So whilst we're talking about locally led work, and particularly focusing on early intervention, prevention, actually talking to the Treasury, we need to talk about how we, by doing this, by them giving us confidence to work at a local level, that we get the better outcomes, and that particularly in case of inequalities and supporting the most vulnerable, be it in adults or children's. But actually, if we do it right and address the horrific waste of public money that we spend as a country because our policy interventions are just so inappropriate. If you look at the causes why so many people are in our prisons, for example, and it's all so often related to preventable causes around mental health issues, learning disabilities, drug and alcohol abuse, domestic violence, all of those things that if we could work locally with our partners, with a realistic job offers, skills development, all of those things will actually do so much to enhance our local areas and actually, from a Treasury point of view, save money. And I think we have to be very careful to make sure that our asks of government are addressed, so we don't appear to be just asking for money into a bottomless pit. We're actually are seriously talking about investing and enhancing in our local areas and local delivery, which again, you know, we keep saying our potential is enormous, and you know, the lack of government trust in our ability to take these agendas forward is actually doing a great disservice not only to our local areas but actually to the country as a whole. And if we can all start talking in that sort of a language and really getting through our, you know, our determination to move our communities forward, then maybe we'll get a better hearing than we are at the moment.
Okay, very good. And I must, I'm afraid, bring this to a close, slightly late, my fault, of course. Massive of participation and chat, so that's a very good sign. I'll just say a few words before I thank everybody. I think we've roamed across a substantial amount of territory involving core cities, combined authorities, key cities, and indeed the complexities, which I always treasure in some ways, of the particular geography that the Industrial Revolution left the United Kingdom, which we all live with and enjoy, and you know, comes out in sports and all sorts of other ways, but in government terms is quite complicated, but a joy, and we must ever seek to improve it. I think we bumped into short-term protective questions for the businesses and the economies and people of cities and combined authorities, as well as looking to some of the potential benefits in the medium term of an extraordinary shock to the economy, but not one from which it's irrecoverable. We've talked about devolution. I think that devolution to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, I think as Anand said and Dan Wincott implied, there will be some compare and contrast work to be done here, particularly in the matter of how COVID-19 has been handled. And there's certainly much unfinished work to be done on devolution in England, and indeed we're expecting government consultation on that later in the year. The trade-off between skills and FE, training people and building infrastructure, I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive, but in the long term, everybody in Britain will be more productive if they have higher levels of skill. We know that. A lot to be said for training people and upping skills right across the United Kingdom. And then one thing that didn't come up, but I'm fascinated by, is the future of central government. There's a lot going on in there at the moment. A lot of people trying to be like a lot of change, and in some ways, local government, cities, combined authorities, towns, smaller cities, all look sort of comparatively peaceful and well run. So we'll see how that all turns out. Anyway, I'd just like to thank our panelists, those still with us, Judith Blake, James Palmer, and Menon, also Carolyn, Fairbairn, and Holly Billington, who had to leave us. Also, I think it's worth thanking the team at Core Cities, Emily Carter, who's been brilliantly managing the behind-the-scenes activities today, Steve Barwick and Chris Murray have been involved as well as ever. So thank you to all of you, and to everybody who's joined us. We had 80 odd people at max, which is a good number. We'd have had to have a bigger room if we were in real rooms. So, well, this is a real room. It's just a different kind that we've come used to. So anyway, thank you all for joining us. And there'll be other Core Cities events soon, which I'm sure, and doubtless Key Cities events and Combined Authority events. So do join them and us again. And have a good rest of the day, and a very goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.